Dr. Aris Thorne watched the stars streak by his viewing port, not as a scientist for once, but just as a man feeling very small. His ship, the Stargazer, was tiny compared to the vast silver vessel it was approaching. This was the Starseeker, flagship of the Cathari, a species from so far away that their very existence had rewritten human textbooks just a year ago. And now he was going to meet them. Aris wasn't a general or a famous explorer, he was a biologist. He got chosen for this job because he was calm, he was careful, and he knew more about alien life forms than almost anyone on Earth. His job was simple: say hello, be friendly, and learn everything he could. He was good at learning. When his ship docked with a soft thud, Aris took a deep breath. The airlock door hissed open, and he stepped through into a world of soft, glowing light and gentle humming sounds. The Cathari were there to greet him. They were tall and slender, with long limbs that seemed to glide rather than walk. Their skin wasn't skin at all. It looked more like polished stone, smooth and cool with subtle patterns that shifted slowly in the light. They were, in a word, elegant. They spoke not with voices, but with a soft, musical chiming sound that a translator device around his neck turned into perfect English. "Welcome, Dr. Thorne. We are honored by your presence." The tour began. The Cathari ship was incredible. Rooms changed shape to suit their needs. Information floated in the air like glowing pictures. They showed him gardens with plants made of crystal that sang in the wind, and libraries where entire stories were told with a single shared thought. Aris was amazed. He felt like a child walking through a city of giants. But slowly he started to notice something, the way they looked at him. It wasn't unkind, but it was careful. Very, very careful. When he reached out to touch a floating, glowing orb, a Cathari gently moved his hand away. The energy field, while stable, could cause cellular disruption to your form, it chimed, its tone polite. When he walked a little too quickly, another would glide in front of him. The floor gradient changes here. A misstep could cause a ligament torsion. At first, Aris was grateful. They were being good hosts, looking out for him. But the comments kept coming. Your atmospheric requirements are quite specific and narrow. A remarkable adaptation, yet it demands constant environmental control. Your body's water-based composition appears to have low structural stability. A fascinating evolutionary choice. He began to understand. They weren't just being cautious. They saw him as fragile, delicate, like a teacup in a room full of steel tools. He was a thing to be studied and protected, not an equal. The feeling was strange. He was a healthy man. He hiked mountains back on Earth. He played sports with his nephews. But here, he felt like he was made of glass. The final moment came when they entered a vast medical bay. A Cathari scientist, who introduced itself as a healer, asked to scan him. A soft light passed over his body. "The scan confirms our initial analysis," the healer chimed to the others. "The skeletal structure is calcium-based, remarkably inefficient for load-bearing. The dermal layer offers negligible protection from radiation or kinetic impact. Muscular density is within predicted parameters for a low-gravity species." It turned to Aris. "Do not be concerned, Dr. Thorne. We have implemented maximum fragility protocols for your visit. Your safety is our primary concern." Fragility protocols. The words hung in the air. They had a name for it. They had a whole plan for how to handle him because he was so breakable. Aris just smiled and nodded, the way he always did when he was collecting data. "Thank you," he said. "Your hospitality is very thorough." But inside, a small, stubborn part of him felt a little annoyed. They saw his bones as weak, but they didn't know he'd broken his arm climbing a tree as a kid and it had healed stronger. They saw his skin as soft, but they didn't know it could sweat to cool him and heal itself from cuts. They saw a thing that was weak. He knew he was a thing that could adapt and endure and survive. He followed them to the next part of the tour, a place they called the Bioconvergence Lab. It was filled with shimmering energy fields and floating, intricate shapes that looked like living geometry. It was beautiful. One shape in particular caught his eye, a complex, rotating crystal that pulsed with a soft blue light. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Forgetting the protocols, for a moment, driven purely by his curiosity as a scientist, he stepped closer. He leaned in, his eyes wide, trying to understand its structure, to see the beauty of this alien life form. He didn't see the large Cathari guardian standing silently in the corner. Its job was to protect the delicate equipment in the lab, and, right now, the fragile human guest was getting too close to a very powerful energy source. The guardian moved. It was fast, blindingly fast. In one smooth motion, it crossed the room. Its intention was simple and pure, to pull the human gently but firmly back to a safe distance. But Eris didn't know that. All he saw was a blur of motion from his side. He turned his head and saw a giant, armored creature lunging at him. Its limb, which ended in a sharp, pointed tip, was reaching straight for his chest. His brain didn't have time to think about friendly intentions or cultural misunderstandings. A deeper, older part of his brain took over, the part that knew about predators and sudden danger and the will to live. His heart hammered against his ribs. Time seemed to slow down. Every sense became sharp and clear. This was it. This was an attack. And Dr. Eris Thorne, the fragile envoy, was about to reply. The crystal floating in the center of the Bioconvergence Lab was the most beautiful thing Eris had ever seen. It wasn't just a rock. It was alive. It pulsed with a soft internal light, like a slow, sleeping heartbeat. Tiny, intricate patterns swirled across its surface, shifting and changing like living smoke trapped inside glass. It spun silently, and with each rotation, it gave off a low, gentle hum that he felt in his bones more than heard with his ears. For a biologist who had dedicated his life to understanding life in all its forms, this was a moment of pure wonder. It was like seeing a secret of the universe for the first time. He forgot about the vast, alien ship. He forgot about the elegant, silent Cathari gliding around him. He even forgot the slightly annoying feeling of being treated like a fragile piece of china. All that existed was him, and this incredible, impossible creature of energy and crystal. His scientist's mind took over, desperate to understand. How did it live? What did it eat? How did it think? Without thinking, he took a step closer. Then another. The safety line the Cathari had politely asked him to stay behind felt silly now. He needed to see. He leaned in, his eyes wide, his notebook, forgotten in his hand. The blue light from the crystal played across his face. He was so close he could feel a faint warmth coming from it, a soft vibration in the air that tickled his skin. In that moment, he wasn't a diplomat. He was a child staring at a firefly for the very first time, filled with nothing but awe. Across the room, Unit 7 Gamma stood perfectly still. It was a Cathari guardian, a purpose-built protector for sensitive environments like this lab. Its body was larger and more heavily armored than the scientists'. Its polished carapace a darker, duller gray. Its prime directive was simple: protect the specimens and protect the guests. Its sensors were constantly monitoring everything: energy levels, atmospheric pressure, and the location of the one fragile biological guest. Its logic was perfect and cold. The human, Dr. Thorne, had crossed the recommended safe perimeter. Proximity to the crystal's energy field, while not instantly lethal, could cause cumulative cellular damage to a water-based life form. The human was, by its own admission, fragile. Therefore, the human must be moved. There was no anger in 7 Gamma. There was no malice. There was only a program to be followed, a problem to be solved. The most efficient way to move the human was a quick, precise physical intervention. It calculated the optimal trajectory and force required to pull the human back without causing it harm or startling it too much. And so, it moved. To the Cathari, its movement was a smooth, efficient glide. To Eris, it was a sudden explosion of motion. 1 second, he was lost in wonder. The next, his human senses, sharpened by a million years of watching for predators in the tall grass, screamed a warning. A dark shape rushed at him from his side with terrifying speed. His head snapped around. What he saw froze the blood in his veins. The largest Cathari he had ever seen was lunging right at him. Its face was an unreadable mask of stone. One of its 4 limbs, which ended not in a hand but in a sharp, pointed claw, was thrusting directly toward his chest. His thinking mind, the part that knew about diplomacy and first contact protocols, shut down completely. It was too slow. The older, animal part of his brain, the part that knew about lions and bears and sudden violent death, took over instantly. This was not a greeting. This was not a friendly tap. This was an attack. A jolt of pure electricity, a chemical called adrenaline, flooded his system. The world didn't slow down. It became unbearably clear and fast. His heart punched against, his ribs like a hammer. Every detail was razor sharp, the cool air on his skin, the faint hum of the crystal, the menacing gleam on the tip of that approaching claw. There was no time to speak, no time to ask questions, no time to be afraid. There was only time to react. His body knew what to do even before his mind did. He didn't decide to fight. His body decided for him. It was a reaction written in his DNA, a gift from every ancestor who had ever faced a threat and lived to talk about it. He dropped into a slight crouch, not a trained fighter's stance, but a natural, balanced posture that every human instinctively knows. His weight shifted to his back foot. His hands, almost of their own accord, came up to protect his face and chest. His breath hissed out between his clenched teeth in a short, sharp gasp. The Cathari's claw was inches away. There was no more time to retreat. His options vanished until only one remained. In that final split second, the man of science vanished. The diplomat vanished. All that was left was a human being, cornered and responding with the only language left to him, the language of survival. He was no longer fragile. He was potential energy, coiled tight and ready to explode. The peaceful lab was about to become the stage for a very old, very human conversation. The world shrank. The vast, amazing lab, the humming crystal, the watching aliens, it all melted away into a blur. The only thing that was real, the only thing that mattered, was the sharp, pointed tip of the Cathari's limb coming straight for the center of his chest. Eris's body reacted before his brain could even form a single word. It was like a switch flipped deep inside him, a switch that had been installed by every one of his ancestors who had ever faced a snarling animal or a falling rock and lived to tell the tale. A massive surge of chemicals flooded his system, making his heart thunder and his senses become painfully sharp. He could see every tiny groove on the Cathari's carapace. He could hear the faint hum of the ship's systems like it was a roar. This wasn't fear. This was pure, raw focus. His muscles, all of them, tightened at once. His legs, which had felt so weak and useless minutes before, coiled like springs. His back straightened. His arms, which usually held books and computers, came up not in a weak block, but in a movement that was both defensive and ready to strike. His soft, 5-fingered hand did something no Cathari could do. The fingers curled in, tucking themselves tight, and the thumb locked firmly over them. In less than a second, his harmless-looking hand had transformed. It was no longer a tool for holding. It was a weapon, a compact, bony hammer made of flesh and bone. There was no thought. There was only action and reaction. The Cathari limb was a fraction of a second from impact. Aris didn't try to grab it. He didn't try to run. His body chose the third option, the one buried in the DNA of every creature that has ever been cornered. Fight. He pivoted. His right shoulder pulled back, his hips twisting, putting the whole weight of his body behind the movement. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a short, incredibly fast and powerful explosion of motion. All the strength from his coiled legs, his twisting core, and his driving shoulder focused into one single point, his newly made fist. He didn't aim for the body. The body was big and looked like solid rock. He aimed for the limb itself, for the joint where it met the main body, because somewhere in his animal brain, that looked like the right place to hit. The punch traveled maybe 18 inches. It was too fast for the eye to follow. Then, it connected. The sound was wrong. It was a sound that did not belong in this clean, quiet, technological place. It was a brutal, wet, cracking noise. It was the sound of two very different kinds of strength meeting in the worst way possible. For Eris, there was a blinding flash of pain in his hand. It was immediate and white-hot. He felt the small bones grind together. He knew instantly that he had broken something. But the pain was a distant thing, muffled by the chemicals screaming through his body. His fist had snapped forward and back to a defensive position in a flash, his body already bracing for the next move, his eyes locked on the threat. For the Cathari Guardian, the experience was something else entirely. It was pure information shock. Its sensors registered the impact not as a push or a shove, but as an instantaneous extreme pressure spike in a very concentrated area. The force was far, far beyond any projection its systems had for a fragile Category 3 biological, but worse than the sensor readings was the physical result. The human's fist had landed exactly on the joint it had been aiming for. A web of fine cracks like a pane of glass hit by a pebble spread out from the point of impact across its polished carapace. The limb, which had been moving forward with solid purpose, was now knocked violently aside, hanging at a strange angle. The Guardian did not feel pain as humans understand it, but it felt a system failure. It felt a catastrophic miscalculation. Its internal alarms were blaring, reporting structural integrity compromised. It staggered back a single step, its other limbs moving to stabilize itself. Its smooth, graceful glide was broken. It was thrown completely off balance, not just physically but mentally. Its logic circuits scrambled to process the event. Attack, counterattack, damage sustained, threat level reassessment error. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. The gentle hum of the crystal seemed deafening. The other Cathari in the room, who had been observing the human with quiet curiosity, were now completely frozen. Their slender forms were statues. The soft, chiming sounds of their communication had stopped dead. They stared at the human, who stood his ground, chest heaving, one hand held tight against his body, his eyes still wide with a fierce, wild light, and they stared at their guardian, whose arm was now visibly damaged, with a spiderweb of fractures marring its perfect surface. The event had taken less than 3 seconds. In that time, 100,000 years of human evolution had spoken. Its mind. The idea of the fragile human had not just been broken, it had been shattered. For a long moment, nothing happened. The only sound was Eris's own ragged breathing, loud in his ears. The sharp, shocking pain in his hand was finally breaking through the adrenaline, a throbbing, hot ache that made him feel sick to his stomach. He cradled it against his chest, his mind a swirling mess of confusion and fear. What had he done? He had just hit an alien diplomat. He had probably ruined the entire mission. He looked at the Guardian, seeing the clear web of cracks on its limb, and a cold dread washed over him. The Cathari were completely still. They were not built for sudden violence. Their world was one of quiet order and precise calculation. This was chaos. It was a wrong note in a perfect song. They did not shout or cry out. Their silence was deeper and more unnerving than any noise could have been. Then, the room erupted into silent, efficient madness. Two of the slimmer Cathari scientists glided forward, not towards Aris, but towards the Guardian. Their long, delicate fingers, which usually handled fragile crystals, now hovered over the damaged limb. Soft lights emerged from their fingertips, scanning the cracks. They did not speak. Data streamed in the air around them, numbers and symbols, flashing too fast for a human to follow. They were assessing the damage with a calm that felt almost robotic. At the same time, another Cathari moved toward Aris. He flinched, expecting to be grabbed, but it stopped a few feet away. It held up its hands in a gesture that seemed to mean stop or wait. It was the same one who had called him fragile. Its large, dark eyes were fixed on him, but the polite curiosity was gone. Now there was only intense, bewildered analysis. It didn't look angry. It looked fascinated and deeply, deeply confused. A soft, glowing field of light emerged from a ring on the wall and surrounded Aris. Not like a cage, but like a bubble. He realized it was a quarantine field, the kind you'd use to study a dangerous, unknown microbe. He was now a specimen in a box. The Cathari scientist outside the bubble pointed a device at him. A beam of gentle orange light washed over his body, pausing on his injured hand. He felt a warm, tingling sensation, and the sharp edge of the pain faded to a dull throb. They were fixing him. Even after he had broken one of them, their first instinct was to fix him. The scientist stared at the data floating in the air. It tilted its head, a gesture of pure puzzlement. It chimed softly, not to Aris, but to the others in the room. The musical notes were quick and sharp, filled with questions. Aris could guess what the data was saying. It was telling them a biological impossibility. His body had just performed a feat of strength that should have been beyond its design. The force of the punch, the speed of the reaction. It was all wrong. Their scanners would be showing them his bone density, his muscle mass. On paper, he shouldn't have been able to do that. But he did. And then there was the other part, the part that truly didn't make sense to them. He was injured. He had willingly damaged his own body to deliver that blow. To the Cathari, whose first and greatest law was self-preservation and integrity of form, this was insanity. It was like a computer smashing its own keyboard to type a letter. The concept of sacrificing a part of yourself to protect the whole was not in their programming. It was a human thing. A desperate, painful, powerful thing. The scientist looked from the data screen to Aris's face, then to his hand and back to the data. The polite, patronizing mask was completely gone. In its place was a look of dawning, profound respect, mixed with a healthy amount of fear. The other scientists were gathered around the Guardian, but they kept glancing back at Aris's bubble. The story was being written in the air around them through their data streams. The numbers didn't lie. Their entire file on humanity was being rewritten right in front of their eyes. Subject exhibits extreme, latent kinetic output. Reaction time exceeds biological baseline projections by 400%. Subject prioritizes threat neutralization over personal structural integrity. Concept. Fragility protocol requires immediate reevaluation. Aris slowly sank to his knees inside the soft light of the bubble, exhausted. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving him shaking and cold. He had come here to make peace and to learn, and instead, he had started a fight. He felt a deep shame. He looked at the Cathari, expecting to see anger, to see blame. But he didn't see that at all. He saw awe. He saw the way they might look at a sudden, violent storm, something terrifying, but something powerful and natural that commanded respect. They weren't looking at the fragile envoy anymore. They were looking at the storm. Time passed. Aris wasn't sure how long he sat in the soft light of the bubble. The throbbing in his hand was now a dull, distant ache, thanks to the Cathari's medical beam. He felt hollowed out, exhausted. The silence in the lab was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with unspoken thoughts. He was sure he was waiting for punishment. He had damaged their property, attacked one of their crew. He had failed in his most important job, being a peaceful representative. Finally, the door to the lab slid open with a quiet hiss. The Cathari who entered was different from the others. It was older, its stone-like skin etched with finer, more complex patterns. Its movements were even slower and more deliberate. The other Cathari in the room bowed their heads slightly as it glided in. This was clearly someone in charge. It went to the Guardian first. It examined the cracked limb, its long fingers tracing the web of fractures without touching it. It chimed a few soft, low notes to the scientists, who chimed back, their tones full of data and explanation. The leader listened, then turned, its large, dark eyes fixed on Aris. Aris's heart sank. This was it. The judgment. The leader gestured, and the light bubble around Aris dissolved. He slowly got to his feet, wincing a little. He kept his injured hand close to his body. He prepared himself for the angry words, for the announcement that humanity was too violent, too dangerous for the galaxy. The leader glided closer until it was standing right in front of him. It did not look angry. It looked serious, thoughtful. And there was a new emotion in its eyes that Aris hadn't seen before, a deep, unwavering respect. "It is we who must apologize, Dr. Thorne," it chimed. Its voice through the translator was low and melodic. "The error was not yours. It was entirely ours." Aris blinked. He opened his mouth to protest, to say that he was the one who threw the punch, but the leader gently raised a hand to stop him. "We categorized you based on what we could measure," it continued. "We saw calcium-based bones and thought brittle. We saw soft tissue and thought weak. We saw a system that requires constant external energy intake and thought needy. We placed you in a box labeled fragile. We were wrong." It gestured to the data still floating in the air around them. The numbers and graphs glowed brightly. "You do not possess strength like a thing you carry," the leader said, its tone full of wonder. "You generate it. You create it from nothing, in a moment of need, summoning forces that your baseline form should not allow. It is a potential that sleeps inside you, waiting." It then pointed to Aris's injured hand. "And this was the second lesson. You do not simply avoid damage, you endure it. You accept a temporary break to achieve a greater goal. You heal. The concept is..." It paused, searching for the word alien to us. To willingly compromise one's own integrity is the logic of madness, or the logic of a survivor. The leader looked around the room, at its scientists, at the Guardian. That action, what you call a punch, was not an act of violence. It was a message, a data packet written in a language of pure force. It taught us a fundamental truth about your species that our scanners could never see. Aris just stood there, listening. The shame and fear began to melt away, replaced by a slow, dawning understanding. They weren't condemning him. They were learning from him. "The galaxy is filled with strong species," the leader chimed. "We have beings of immense physical power. We have creatures with natural armor. But we have never encountered a species whose true power is hidden, a species that appears soft but contains a hidden storm." It turned back to him. "Therefore, your classification must change. You will no longer be listed in our databases as fragile, sapient Tier 3. That term is inadequate. It is an insult to what you are." The leader made a gesture, and a new line of symbols appeared in the air, glowing with a soft, golden light. From this moment forward, your species will be known as latent volcanic species. It is a new category, created just for you. It means you appear calm and peaceful on the surface, but beneath, there is a tremendous power sleeping, a power that can erupt when needed, with world-changing force. The words hung in the air. Latent volcanic species. It sounded terrifying and powerful all at once. The galaxy will learn of this, the leader said. They will learn that a human's true danger is not in their ships or their weapons. It is in their biology. It is in their spirit. It is in the terrifying history of your world written in your bone and muscle. You will never be underestimated again. Aris finally found his voice. It was a whisper. I just reacted. I was scared. The leader inclined its head. That is the most fascinating part of all. Your greatest power is not one you consciously control. It is a gift from your ancestors, a gift of survival, and it makes you one of the most remarkable species we have ever encountered. The leader reached out. This time, its movement was slow, deliberate. It did not offer a handshake, a human gesture. Instead, it gently touched its own forehead, then touched Aris's uninjured shoulder, a gesture of profound respect. Welcome, it chimed softly, to a galaxy that is now much wiser and much more interesting because you are in it. Aris looked around the room. The Cathari were no longer looking at him with caution or pity. They looked at him with a new, solemn awareness. He was no longer a fragile envoy. He was the representative of a latent volcanic species, and he knew, as he stood there with his aching hand, that nothing would ever be the same.